My name is Samantha Wilson, and I'm 29 years old. Sitting in my grandmother Eleanor's luxurious Manhattan penthouse, I felt every judgmental stare from my wealthy cousins and aunt. The poor branch of the family shouldn't expect much, Aunt Patricia sneered, as they openly mocked my budget lifestyle. Grandmother looked uncomfortable, but remained silent. Without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. The family fell silent as I revealed a real estate contract inside. Their smug faces transformed to shock when they realized I now owned everything they thought was theirs. I sometimes wonder where you're watching this from. Maybe you're sitting on your couch after a long day dealing with your own family drama, or perhaps you're commuting and need something to distract you from traffic. Wherever you are, if you've ever been underestimated by family, you'll understand exactly how I felt that day. Like this video and subscribe if you've ever fantasized about having your own perfect revenge moment, because trust me, what happened next in that penthouse changed my family forever. To understand what happened that day in the penthouse, you need to know about the Blackwells, my mother's family, and one of Manhattan's oldest real estate dynasties. The empire wasn't inherited or built on old money. My grandmother Eleanor started from nothing, the daughter of immigrants who worked as a secretary at a small real estate firm in the 1960s. Through sheer determination, strategic investments, and an uncanny ability to predict market trends, she built Blackwell Properties into a powerhouse worth hundreds of millions. My mother Rebecca was Eleanor's eldest daughter, always the free spirit who questioned the family's obsession with status and wealth. When she fell in love with my father Thomas Wilson, a dedicated public school teacher with no fortune to his name, the family considered it practically a betrayal. She married beneath her. Aunt Patricia, Eleanor's younger daughter, would say loud enough for me to hear at family gatherings. Patricia had done the right thing by marrying into the Montgomery family, old money with connections throughout New York's elite circles. She gave my grandmother 3 grandchildren: Natalie, Heather, and Brett. They grew up with every imaginable privilege: private schools in Manhattan, summer homes in the Hamptons, skiing trips to Aspen, and trust funds that ensured they'd never need to work a day in their lives if they didn't want to. Meanwhile, my parents chose a modest life in a brownstone in a still-developing neighborhood in Brooklyn. My father taught history at the local high school, and my mother worked as an art therapist at a community center. We weren't poor by any normal standard. We took modest vacations, I had everything I needed, and our home was comfortable, but compared to the Blackwell wealth, we lived in different universes. Money isn't everything, Samantha, my mother would say. Character is built through work and purpose, not handed to you. She insisted I attend public school rather than the private academies my cousins attended. I worked summer jobs while they vacationed on yachts. I learned to budget my allowance while they swiped black cards without checking the balance. What the rest of the family didn't know was that despite the rift, grandmother Eleanor maintained a close relationship with me. Starting when I was 12, we began meeting weekly for lunch at a small diner in a neighborhood where no one would recognize the Eleanor Blackwell. She would arrive in a modest car with her trusted driver Miles, dressed down without her usual fine jewelry. "Our secret," she would say with a wink as we slid into a booth. Over grilled cheese sandwiches and milkshakes, she would ask about my studies, my friends, and my dreams. Unlike the intimidating matriarch she portrayed at family functions, in these moments she was just my grandmother, warm, attentive, and genuinely interested in my life. "Your mother chose a different path, but she has integrity," grandmother told me once. "The others don't understand the value of that, but I do." As I grew older, I worked my way through college studying urban planning and sustainable development. While my cousins were making tabloid appearances at Manhattan's elite clubs, I was pulling all-nighters finishing design projects and interning at city planning offices. I graduated with honors and built a respectable career working with community development organizations, focusing on creating sustainable, affordable housing solutions. Ironically, the opposite of the luxury developments that had built the Blackwell fortune. At family events, which became increasingly rare as I got older, my achievements were dismissed with patronizing comments. "How adorable that you're so passionate about your little projects," Aunt Patricia would say. examining her manicure. "Couldn't you just join the family business and actually make some real money?" Brett would ask, already on his third scotch before dinner. Natalie, who held a meaningless vice president title at Blackwell Properties despite having no qualifications, would smile with false sympathy. "Not everyone is cut out for success, I suppose. It's nice that you're doing something meaningful." 8 months before the fateful family meeting, my world shattered when my parents died in a car accident returning from a weekend getaway. A drunk driver crossed the median, killing them instantly. The family made appearances at the funeral. Of course, appearances were everything to the Blackwells. Aunt Patricia hugged me stiffly, whispering, "They lived the life they chose," as if their death was somehow a consequence of not embracing the Blackwell wealth. In the months that followed, Grandmother Eleanor was my only real support from the family. Our lunch meetings became more frequent, though now in her penthouse as her health began to decline. At 85, she remained sharp as ever mentally, but physically, she was becoming frail. She was increasingly frustrated with my aunt's controlling behavior and my cousins' entitled attitudes. "They think wealth is their birthright," she confided during one of our visits. "They don't understand that wealth without purpose or responsibility is just waste." Around this time, I began to notice something strange. Grandmother started asking my opinion on business matters. Potential property acquisitions, development proposals, investment opportunities. At first, I thought she was just making conversation, but I soon realized she was genuinely interested in my perspective. "You have good instincts, Samantha," she said after I pointed out potential issues with a luxury development that her executives had enthusiastically endorsed. "You see beyond the surface. That's rare." What I didn't realize then was that these conversations were tests. Tests that my aunt and cousins were failing miserably without even knowing they were being evaluated. The invitation arrived on heavy cream stationery with the Blackwell Properties embossed logo, an urgent family meeting to be held at Grandmother's penthouse the following week. I hadn't been to one of these formal family gatherings in over a year, and with my parents gone, I wasn't sure I belonged there anymore. Still, Grandmother had been kind during my grief, and I felt an obligation to attend. I spent the evening before the meeting mentally preparing myself for the family's usual condescension. I laid out my most professional outfit, a simple navy blue dress, practical but well-made leather pumps, and the pearl earrings my mother had left me. Not flashy by Blackwell standards, but dignified. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of criticizing my appearance, at least. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and crisp. I took the subway to the Upper East Side, walking the final blocks to my grandmother's building, a pre-war masterpiece overlooking Central Park that had been in the family portfolio for generations. The limestone facade gleamed in the morning light, the brass fixtures on the revolving doors polished to a mirror shine. The doorman, Frederick, gave me a once-over as I approached. I'd visited enough times that he should have recognized me, but his expression suggested he was trying to determine if I belonged. "I'm here for the Blackwell meeting," I said firmly. "Samantha Wilson." Yes," he replied, checking his list with deliberate slowness. "Mrs. Blackwell's other granddaughter." The slight pause spoke volumes. As I waited for the elevator, my cousin Brett emerged from the building's private parking garage. At 35, Brett had the polished appearance of wealth without the substance to back it up: designer suit, expensive watch, and the permanently smug expression of someone who never faced real consequences for his actions. "Sam," he acknowledged without looking at me, staring at his phone. "Surprised they invited you." "Grandmother invited me," I corrected, stepping into the elevator beside him. He smirked.
"Right.
"Well, don't get your hopes up about any big inheritance. Mom's been working on Grandmother for months. The company's future is pretty much decided." The elevator ascended in silence after that, the tension building with each floor. When we reached the penthouse level, Brett strode out without holding the door, letting it nearly close on me as I followed. Grandmother's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the building, a sprawling residence with panoramic views of Central Park. The foyer opened into a grand living area where priceless art hung on the walls alongside family photographs, carefully curated moments of Blackwell history that told the story the family wanted to project. Aunt Patricia was the first to spot us entering. At 63, she maintained a regal bearing, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture impeccable. She was the spitting image of grandmother in her younger years, a resemblance she cultivated carefully. "Samantha, darling," she said, air-kissing near my cheeks. "How resourceful of you to join us. That dress must be several seasons old, but it's holding up admirably." Before I could respond, my cousins Natalie and Heather approached. Both in their early 30s, they had perfected the art of looking effortlessly expensive. Natalie, the elder at 34, wore a designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Heather, 32 and on her third marriage, dripped with jewelry that caught the light with every gesture. "Sam's here," Natalie observed, her eyes flicking dismissively over my simple pearl earrings. "We were just wondering if you'd bother coming." "Cute bag," Heather added, glancing at my worn leather satchel. "Is that vintage? Or just old?" I forced a smile. "It's practical. Some things are chosen for function rather than status." This earned me a patronizing laugh from both of them before they turned away, whispering to each other as they rejoined the gathering. The family had arranged themselves around the massive antique table in the formal dining room. Grandmother Eleanor sat at the head, looking smaller than I remembered. Her once commanding presence seemed diminished, though her eyes remained sharp as they followed the movements of everyone in the room. Beside her sat Jordan Miller, the family's longtime attorney, arranging documents with methodical precision. I noticed immediately that a place had been set for me at the far end of the table, as distant from grandmother as possible. It was a deliberate slight, positioning me as an afterthought. "Samantha," grandmother called, her voice still carrying authority despite her frail appearance. "Come sit closer to me. There's an empty chair beside Jordan." Aunt Patricia's smile tightened as I moved to the indicated seat, upgrading my position significantly. "Mother, we had arranged the seating according to..." "According to what, Patricia?" Grandmother interrupted. "Samantha is my granddaughter. She'll sit where I ask her to sit." An uncomfortable silence fell as I took my new place. I could feel the resentment radiating from my aunt and cousins across the table. Jordan Miller cleared his throat. In his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he had been the Blackwell family attorney for decades. "Now that everyone is here, we can begin. Mrs. Blackwell has called this meeting to discuss important matters regarding the family's future and the preservation of the Blackwell legacy." "Before we start," Aunt Patricia interjected, "I think we should acknowledge that some of us have dedicated our lives to maintaining and growing the Blackwell legacy, while others have chosen different paths." Her gaze fixed meaningfully on me. Grandmother's expression remained neutral. "All paths are valid, Patricia. Let's proceed with the agenda." As Jordan began reviewing the current state of the family holdings, the tension in the room continued to build. He detailed properties across Manhattan, Boston, and Chicago, development projects in various stages, and investment portfolios, a vast empire worth well over $400 million. Brett leaned forward, interrupting. "What we really need to discuss is succession planning. Mom has been effectively running things already with grandmother's guidance. The transition should be seamless." "I'm not sure why Samantha is even part of this meeting," Natalie added. "It's not like she's ever shown any interest in the family business. Or any business acumen whatsoever," Heather chimed in with a laugh. Aunt Patricia nodded in agreement. "Some family members simply wouldn't understand the complexities involved. The poor relation, as it were." The room fell silent at this direct insult. I felt heat rising to my face but maintained my composure, looking directly at my grandmother. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a calculated patience, as if she were waiting for a specific moment. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should proceed to the discussion of asset distribution and succession planning, which is the primary purpose of today's meeting." "Excellent idea," Patricia said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Let's talk about preserving what generations of Blackwells have built, ensuring it remains in capable hands. And with that, the meeting descended into the most blatant display of entitlement I had ever witnessed, with none of them realizing they were digging their own graves with every word. As the family meeting continued, each condescending remark from my aunt and cousins triggered memories of a lifetime of exclusion and betrayal. This wasn't new behavior. It was simply the culmination of a pattern that had defined my relationship with the Blackwell side of my family for decades. I remembered being 16, excitedly telling my mother about cousin Natalie's upcoming Sweet 16 party that all the family teens were talking about. Mom's face had fallen as she admitted we hadn't received an invitation. Later, we saw the photos on social media, a lavish celebration on a yacht circling Manhattan, with every remotely connected family member present except for me. They probably just forgot, my father had said kindly, but the look he exchanged with my mother told me they both knew better. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, grandmother had initially planned to attend. 2 days before the ceremony, she called to apologize. Something urgent had come up. Years later, I discovered through a casual comment that Aunt Patricia had convinced her that attending would only encourage Rebecca's rejection of family values. Apparently, academic achievement at a public school wasn't worth celebrating. The pattern continued into my college years. Despite my excellent grades and admission to a prestigious university, when tuition bills strained my parents' finances, they reluctantly approached grandmother for assistance. Aunt Patricia intercepted the request. The Wilson branch of the family has always insisted on independence, she told my parents. It would be disrespectful to your choices to interfere now. This conversation happened the same month Brett received a new Porsche for his birthday, and Heather's first wedding was funded to the tune of $300,000. While I worked multiple jobs to help with tuition, my cousins floated through life on family money. Brett convinced grandmother to invest $2 million in his revolutionary nightclub concept, which failed within 18 months due to his mismanagement and partying. There were no consequences. He simply moved on to the next venture with fresh family funding. Heather had been married and divorced 3 times by 32, each wedding more extravagant than the last. The family treated each failed marriage as an unfortunate circumstance rather than a pattern of poor judgment, and each new beginning was celebrated with yet another lavish ceremony funded by grandmother. Natalie, despite her business degree from an Ivy League university, where her admission had been secured through a substantial donation, showed no real aptitude for the family business. Yet she was installed as Vice President of Development at Blackwell Properties, with a corner office and salary that actual qualified professionals could only dream of. Her main contributions were taking extended lunches and attaching her name to projects others had developed. The most painful betrayal had been the gradual exclusion of my mother from family decisions. Rebecca had once been close to grandmother, but Aunt Patricia had systematically positioned herself as the loyal daughter, the one who embraced the Blackwell legacy rather than questioning its values. Year by year, my mother was invited to fewer events, consulted on fewer decisions, until she was effectively an outsider. On her deathbed, my mother had held my hand and shared something I'll never forget. Samantha, never let anyone make you feel less than your worth. The Blackwells measure value in dollars, but true worth is in character. Your grandmother knows this, even if she doesn't always show it. What none of the family knew was that for the past 5 years, grandmother had been meeting with me regularly, beyond our casual lunches. After I completed my master's degree in urban planning, she began asking me to review development proposals that came across her desk. "I want your honest opinion," she would say, sliding folders across her desk in her home office. Not as my granddaughter, but as someone who understands sustainable development. At first, the projects were small, a mixed-use development in Brooklyn, affordable housing initiatives in Queens. But gradually, she began sharing larger plans, core investments, and strategic decisions. I would analyze them evenings after my regular job, sending her detailed notes and suggestions. "You have vision," she told me after I identified serious flaws in a major development plan that her executives had enthusiastically endorsed. You see beyond the quick profit to the long-term impact. That's rare in this business. What I didn't realize at the time was that she was comparing my analysis directly with recommendations from Aunt Patricia and my cousins, who were officially involved in the business. While I was suggesting sustainable modifications and community integration, they were focusing solely on luxury amenities and maximum short-term profit. Grandmother never explicitly said she was testing us all, but looking back, the pattern is clear. She was evaluating who truly understood the business she had built, not just the profit mechanisms, but the vision and values that had made Blackwell Properties successful for decades. 3 weeks before the family meeting, Grandmother had asked me to come to the penthouse. She seemed more tired than usual, but her mind was sharp as ever. "Samantha," she said, once we were alone in her study, "I've made some decisions about the future of Blackwell Properties." I nodded, expecting perhaps another consulting project or maybe a formal role in one of the company's charitable foundations. Instead, she unlocked her desk drawer and removed a small brass key. "This opens my private safe in the library, behind a copy of Great Expectations. Appropriate, don't you think?" Her eyes twinkled with rare mischief. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked, confused. "Because there will come a moment when you'll need what's inside," she replied cryptically. "You'll know when. Trust your instincts, they've never failed you." I took the key, not understanding its significance, but recognizing the solemnity of the moment. "Thank you for trusting me," I said simply. She reached out and patted my hand. "Trust is earned, Samantha. You've earned mine over and over. Remember that when others question your place." 2 days later, I used the key while Grandmother was at a doctor's appointment. Inside the safe, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it in Grandmother's elegant handwriting. I didn't open it then. Something told me to wait, just as she had suggested. I placed it in my bag and locked the safe, replacing the key where she had instructed. The envelope remained unopened in my apartment until the morning of the family meeting, when something compelled me to bring it along. As I sat at the family table listening to my aunt and cousins demean my existence, I finally understood why Grandmother had given me that key. The time had come. "Let's be practical about this," Aunt Patricia was saying as Jordan attempted to bring the meeting back to order. "The Blackwell legacy requires stewardship from those who understand its value and have dedicated their lives to preserving it." Jordan cleared his throat. As I was saying, the current holdings of Blackwell Properties and associated family investments amount to approximately $427 million in total valuation. Mrs. Blackwell has specific instructions regarding the distribution and management of these assets, which naturally should follow the commitment and contributions family members have made. Patricia interrupted again, shooting a pointed look in my direction. "Some of us have dedicated decades to building on Mother's foundation." Brett nodded emphatically. "I've been working alongside Grandmother and Mom for years now. I understand the Blackwell vision better than anyone." This was a laughable claim given that his work consisted mainly of showing up for board meetings and taking clients to expensive lunches on the company dime. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room," Natalie said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Equity doesn't necessarily mean equality. Contribution should be considered." Heather nodded. "Exactly. It's not like Samantha has ever shown any interest in being part of the Blackwell legacy. She's been doing her own thing in, what is it again? Community planning?" She said the words as if describing an unsavory medical condition. I maintained my composure, watching Grandmother's face. She remained impassive, observing the interaction without intervening. Jordan looked increasingly uncomfortable but continued reviewing documents with professional detachment. "The Blackwell holdings include 14 major commercial properties in Manhattan," he continued, 8 residential developments, the Chicago portfolio of 6 buildings, the Boston waterfront project, and various other investments and properties as detailed in Section 3 of your briefing materials. As he spoke, Patricia began making notes, practically dividing the spoils already. "The Manhattan residential properties would naturally fall under my division," she murmured to Brett. "You could take the Chicago portfolio." "I've always loved the penthouse in Boston," Heather chimed in. I could see myself spending summers there after the divorce is finalized. The casual way they carved up my grandmother's life's work while she sat at the table was breathtaking in its audacity. None of them even glanced in her direction to gauge her reaction. "I'm thinking of upgrading the yacht," Brett announced to no one in particular. "The current one is nearly 4 years old. Outdated technology." Natalie was scrolling through her phone. "There's a beautiful property in Aspen that just hit the market. 12 bedrooms, ski-in access. Would be perfect for family retreats." "Speaking of family," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "we should address what provisions might be appropriate for Samantha." She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're not heartless, dear. Despite your mother's choices and your alternative career path, you are still family by blood." "How generous of you to acknowledge that," I replied quietly. "I was thinking," Patricia continued as if I hadn't spoken, "perhaps a small stipend would be appropriate. Something to help with that apartment in that transitional neighborhood you insist on living in." "It's actually a very desirable area now," I corrected. "Property values have tripled since I moved in." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Regardless, we should be generous to poor Sam. She clearly needs it more than the rest of us. Does she even have a proper work wardrobe?" Heather stage whispered to Natalie. "Those shoes must be from a department store." "They're actually Italian," I noted. "Just not flashy." Brett snorted. "The point is, Sam, you wouldn't know what to do with real money anyway. You've spent your whole life pretending it doesn't matter." "It doesn't," I replied evenly. "But respect does." "Oh, please." Natalie rolled her eyes. "Spare us the moral high ground. You're here for the same reason we all are, to get your share." Jordan tried again to redirect the conversation. "If we could return to the matter at hand." "The matter at hand," Patricia interrupted sharply, "is ensuring the Blackwell legacy continues properly. And let's be frank, the poor branch of the family should be grateful for whatever they get. It's more than they've earned." The room fell silent at this direct insult. I felt a flush of anger, but kept my expression neutral, years of practice coming to my aid. Across the table, I could see Jordan's discomfort and, more surprisingly, a slight smile playing at the corners of Grandmother's mouth. Grandmother Eleanor straightened in her chair, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "Samantha, you've been very quiet. Do you have anything to add to this discussion?" All eyes turned to me. Patricia looked triumphant, clearly expecting me to either break down or make an emotional scene that would only reinforce their perception of me as the family's poor relation. "Actually," I said calmly, reaching for my bag, "I do have something to contribute." I can still feel the tension in that room, the way time seemed to slow as I reached into my bag. I've replayed this moment countless times in my mind. How the sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows, how the city sprawled below us, oblivious to the family drama unfolding 90 floors above the streets. If you've ever been in a situation where everything changes in an instant, where years of being dismissed suddenly transform into a moment of vindication, you know exactly what I felt. The weight of that sealed envelope in my hands represented not just legal documents, but the validation I never sought but deeply deserved. Have you ever held your breath waiting for the perfect moment to reveal a truth that would change everything? That's what this was. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced a similar moment of revelation with your family. Now, back to that silent room where everyone was watching me reach into my bag. The envelope I withdrew was thick, cream-colored, with the Blackwell Properties watermark visible beneath the sealing wax. I broke the seal deliberately, the soft crack echoing in the silent room. Inside was a bound document, at least 50 pages thick, with a blue cover bearing the Blackwell corporate logo. "What is that?" Patricia demanded, her voice sharper than intended. I slid the document toward Jordan, who recognized it immediately, his eyebrows rising slightly in professional surprise. "This appears to be the deed transfer and corporate restructuring documents for Blackwell Properties Holdings," he said, adjusting his glasses as he examined the first page. "Dated 3 weeks ago." "That's impossible," Brett scoffed. "Grandmother would have told us about any restructuring." Grandmother Eleanor simply folded her hands on the table and watched the scene unfold, that same enigmatic smile playing at the corners of her mouth. What exactly does this document say? Patricia demanded, reaching for it. Jordan kept it firmly in his grasp, professional to the core. It appears to detail the transfer of Blackwell properties to a new corporation called Blackwell Legacy Holdings. The primary shareholder of this new entity is... He paused, glancing at me. Samantha Wilson, who holds 70% of voting shares and is named CEO and chairperson. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the blood rushing in Patricia's face as it turned a dangerous shade of red. "This is a joke," Heather finally said, breaking the tension with a nervous laugh. "It has to be." "I assure you it's not," Jordan replied, continuing to scan the document. "This is legally executed and binding, with my own notarization and that of 2 judges. Everything appears to be in order." "Mother!" Patricia's voice rose to a near shout as she turned to grandmother. "What is the meaning of this? You can't possibly have given everything to her." Grandmother Eleanor straightened in her chair, suddenly looking less frail and more like the formidable businesswoman who had built an empire. "I can and I have, Patricia. Though not everything. You'll note that 30% of shares are distributed among family members with conditions." "Conditions?" Brett spat the word. "What conditions?" Jordan flipped to that section of the document. "The remaining 30% is divided as follows: 5% each to Patricia, Brett, Natalie, and Heather, with a final 10% allocated to a family foundation for education and housing assistance. All shares come with strict conditions regarding employment, contribution, and behavior." "Let me see that." Brett lunged across the table, reaching for the document, but Jordan smoothly moved it away. "I have copies for everyone," I said quietly, removing additional sealed envelopes from my bag and sliding them across the table. "You might want to pay particular attention to Section 12. Heather tore open her envelope, frantically flipping pages. "This can't be legal." "You manipulated grandmother somehow." "Hardly," grandmother replied dryly. "I've been planning this for years." Samantha had no idea until this morning. Natalie had gone pale, her manicured finger tracing lines of text. "This says, we have to work actual jobs in the company to receive any benefits. Actual positions with responsibilities and performance reviews. By independent consultants." "Precisely," grandmother nodded. "No more vanity titles and paychecks for minimal effort." "But the penthouse." Patricia was reading her copy with growing horror. "It says the penthouse now belongs to Samantha, as does the primary office building, the Manhattan portfolio, and the majority of our major holdings," grandmother confirmed. "All transferred legally to Blackwell Legacy Holdings, of which Samantha is the primary owner and decision-maker." "I'm calling Maxwell," Patricia declared, referring to her personal attorney. She fumbled for her phone. "This will be contested immediately. Mother clearly isn't in her right mind." "I've been evaluated by 3 separate physicians and 2 psychiatric professionals," grandmother replied calmly. "All have confirmed my complete mental competence. Their certifications are included in Appendix B." Brett's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "You've destroyed Father's legacy. He built this company alongside you, and you're handing it to an outsider." "Your father joined the company after I had already established it," grandmother corrected icily. "And Samantha is hardly an outsider. She's my granddaughter, just as you are my grandson. The difference is, she has demonstrated the values, work ethic, and vision that are essential to leading Blackwell Properties into the future." "This is about Rebecca, isn't it?" Patricia accused, her voice breaking. "You always favored her, even after she rejected everything you built." "This is about competence, Patricia," grandmother replied evenly. "For the past 5 years, I've been testing all of you, seeking your input on business decisions, evaluating your judgment, assessing your character. Samantha has been doing the same." "What are you talking about?" Natalie asked, confusion mixing with her anger. "Remember the Reynolds development proposal you championed last year?" grandmother asked. "The one you insisted would be revolutionary for the company?" I had Samantha review it independently. She identified 13 critical flaws that would have resulted in regulatory issues and community backlash. You saw none of them. That's because she's obsessed with that community activism nonsense, Brett argued. Business is about profit. Business is about sustainability, grandmother corrected. Short-term profit at the expense of long-term viability is precisely what's wrong with your approach, Brett. You've launched and failed at 6 ventures in 10 years, burning through millions of dollars with nothing to show for it. She turned to Heather. You've treated your marriages like business arrangements, entering and exiting them when they no longer serve your immediate desires. That's not how I built this company, by breaking commitments when they became inconvenient. Finally, she faced Patricia. And you, Patricia. You've spent decades undermining your sister, isolating me from her and Samantha, all while positioning yourself as the loyal daughter. Do you think I didn't see through that? Rebecca questioned our values because she had integrity. You embraced them because they served your ambitions. Patricia's face had gone from red to ashen. Mother, that's not fair. Life isn't fair. Grandmother cut her off. But legacy is earned. None of you have earned the right to lead this company. Samantha has. By doing what? Brett demanded. Living in Brooklyn and working at nonprofit organizations? How does that qualify her to run a real estate empire? By demonstrating judgment, integrity, and vision, grandmother replied. For 5 years, she's been reviewing every major decision this company has made, without any of you knowing it. Her recommendations have been consistently superior to those of our highest-paid executives. She understands that true wealth isn't about extravagance, but about creating sustainable value. I finally spoke up. This isn't about money. It's about purpose. Blackwell Properties was built on grandmother's vision of creating spaces that would endure and serve communities for generations. Somewhere along the way, that vision got lost in the pursuit of luxury and status. So, this is a humanitarian takeover? Natalie sneered. You'll run the company into the ground with affordable housing projects and community centers. Actually, I replied calmly, the financial projections for my proposed direction show a 35% increase in sustainable profit over 5 years. It's all in Section 8 of your packets. Jordan, who had remained professionally detached throughout the confrontation, nodded in confirmation. The business plan is quite sound, with stronger risk management than the company's current trajectory. This is absurd, Patricia declared, standing abruptly. I won't sit here and watch my mother dismantle everything we've built together. We will contest this and we will win. Grandmother's voice cut through the room like steel. You are welcome to try, Patricia. But before you engage in an expensive and ultimately futile legal battle, I suggest you read Section 15 carefully. Contesting this arrangement automatically triggers the forfeiture clause, removing even the 5% share you've been granted. Patricia froze, then snatched up the document again, frantically flipping pages. Her face fell as she found the relevant section. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice finally breaking. I already have, grandmother replied, her tone softening slightly. The family legacy isn't about being rich, Patricia. It's about being worthy. I'm ensuring it continues in the hands of someone who understands that distinction. The room fell into stunned silence as the full reality of the situation sank in. In a single morning, the power dynamics of the Blackwell family had been completely upended. The poor relation they had dismissed for years was now the controlling force behind the entire family fortune. There's one more thing, I said, breaking the silence as I removed a final document from my bag. Effective immediately, the company credit cards issued to Brett, Natalie, and Heather have been deactivated. You'll find new cards with reasonable limits and explicit business-only restrictions in your packets. Brett's hand instinctively went to his wallet, where I knew he carried the black card that had funded his extravagant lifestyle for years. You can't just cut us off, he protested. I'm not, I replied evenly. You'll receive fair compensation for actual work performed. The days of unlimited spending with no accountability are simply over. This meeting is now adjourned, grandmother announced, rising from her chair with surprising strength. "Samantha and I have a business to run. The rest of you have some important decisions to make about your futures." And with that final pronouncement, the Blackwell family, as it had existed for decades, was forever transformed. Aunt Patricia was the first to react after the initial shock wore off. "This is elder abuse," she hissed, her perfectly manicured hand crushing the documents. "You've manipulated Mother when she's vulnerable. No court will let this stand." "I assure you, Mrs. Montgomery," Jordan interjected with professional detachment, "these documents have been prepared with meticulous attention to legal detail. 3 separate law firms vetted them independently, and, as previously mentioned, Mrs. Blackwell has been declared of sound mind by multiple medical professionals. Any contest would be extremely unlikely to succeed." Brett's response was more direct. He stood abruptly, sending his chair clattering backward, and moved toward me with clear intimidation in his stance. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything we've worked for? You have no idea what you're doing." Before he could reach me, security appeared at the dining room entrance. Apparently summoned by a silent, buttoned grandmother had pressed beneath the table. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Blackwell?" asked Marcus, the head of building security. "No problem," grandmother replied calmly. "But I believe my daughter and grandchildren are just leaving. Please escort them to their vehicles." "You can't throw us out of our own home," Heather protested, mascara beginning to run as tears formed. "Actually," I corrected gently, "as per the documents you've just received, this penthouse is now legally my residence, though grandmother will naturally continue to live here as long as she wishes. You're welcome to visit by appointment." Patricia's face contorted with fury. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Your building access codes will be changed by end of day," I continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Please ensure you take any personal belongings with you now. Anything left behind will be inventoried and stored." Marcus stepped forward, his presence alone enough to make Brett step back. "If you'll come with me, please." What followed was a surreal procession as security politely but firmly escorted Patricia, Brett, Heather, and Natalie to the elevator. Patricia maintained rigid composure, her back straight as a rod, while Brett continued muttering threats. Heather's tears had transformed into an almost hysterical attempt to reason with me. "Sam, please," she pleaded as they reached the foyer. "We're family. We can work something out. I always liked you, you know that." "We can discuss arrangements in the future," I replied, not unkindly. "After everyone has had time to process this change." Natalie was the only one who left in silence, her expression unreadable as she clutched her copy of the documents. Of all my cousins, she was the hardest to read, always had been. As the elevator doors closed on their shocked faces, a profound silence fell over the penthouse. Jordan discreetly gathered his papers, nodded respectfully to both grandmother and me, and excused himself to his office downstairs, promising to be available should we need anything further. Left alone with grandmother, I finally allowed myself to sink into a chair, the tension of the confrontation leaving my body in a rush.
"Tea?"
Grandmother asked, as if we'd just finished a normal family visit rather than completely upending the Blackwell dynasty. I laughed despite myself. "Yes, I think tea would be appropriate." As Eleanor's housekeeper Maria prepared a tray in the kitchen, grandmother moved to the sitting room with its panoramic view of Central Park. I followed, still trying to process everything that had happened. "You've been planning this for years," I said, not a question but a realization. She nodded, settling into her favorite armchair. "Since you graduated with your master's degree. I saw something in you then, the same drive I had when I started, but tempered with a compassion I wish I'd had more of in my early years. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have accepted it if I had offered it directly?" she asked shrewdly. I considered this. Probably not. I would have thought it was charity or pity.
"Exactly.
You needed to earn it in your own mind, as well as in reality. And you have, Samantha. Make no mistake about that." Maria brought in the tea service, setting it on the table between us before discreetly withdrawing. "I should have stood up to Patricia years ago," grandmother continued, pouring tea with steady hands. I allowed her to isolate your mother because it was easier than confronting the values this family had embraced. By the time I realized what was happening, the rift seemed too wide to bridge. Mom never blamed you, I said softly. She understood the position you were in. Rebecca had more wisdom than I gave her credit for, Eleanor admitted. She saw what wealth without purpose does to people long before I did. I was so focused on building something lasting that I didn't see how it was corrupting my own family. It's not too late to change that, I offered. No, it isn't. That's precisely why I've done this. She handed me a cup of tea. The 30% I left to Patricia and your cousins comes with strict conditions, but also with opportunity. If they choose to accept those conditions, to work and contribute meaningfully, they can still be part of the legacy. The choice is theirs. Do you think they will? I asked dubiously, remembering the fury on Patricia's face. Patricia won't, Grandmother said with certainty. She's too proud, too entrenched in her sense of entitlement. Brett is likely the same. But Natalie. There might be hope there. And perhaps even Heather, once the shock wears off. We sipped our tea in companionable silence, watching the afternoon light play across the park below. It was surreal to think that this penthouse, this view that had always represented the untouchable Blackwell wealth, was now legally mine. What will you do first? Grandmother asked after a while. I had been thinking about this, even before knowing the full extent of what she had planned. The Chelsea property. I want to convert it to mixed-income housing with integrated community spaces and sustainable design. It could be a model for future developments. She nodded approvingly. Good choice. The zoning is already appropriate, and the neighborhood would benefit from stabilization against aggressive luxury development. And the Scholarship Foundation, I want to expand it, focus on supporting students from underserved communities who are pursuing urban planning and sustainable development degrees. In your parents' names, she suggested. I felt a lump in my throat. Yes, they would have liked that. The peaceful moment was interrupted by my phone buzzing repeatedly. I glanced at the screen to see notifications flooding in, text messages, emails, missed calls. That didn't take long, Grandmother observed dryly. The first wave of fallout had begun. Patricia had apparently gone straight to her personal attorney, who was now demanding an emergency meeting. Brett had taken to social media with vague but threatening posts about family betrayal and justice coming soon. Heather was texting me directly, her messages swinging wildly between pleading reconciliation and bitter accusations. Most concerning were the notifications from the company's PR department. Apparently, Patricia had already contacted several business associates and board members, creating confusion about the company's leadership. We need to get ahead of this, I said, setting down my tea. I should go to the office and meet with the executive team. Grandmother nodded. Maria will help me down. I should be there for this initial transition. After that, it's your show to run. The next several hours were a blur of activity. We convened an emergency meeting of the executive leadership team, where I was introduced as the new CEO and controlling shareholder. The reactions ranged from shocked disbelief to cautious neutrality to, in a few cases, barely concealed relief. It seemed Patricia and Brett had not made many friends in the corporate offices. By evening, security protocols throughout Blackwell properties had been updated. Access cards were reprogrammed, passwords reset, and system permissions modified. Patricia had indeed attempted to access the main corporate accounts, only to find her authorization revoked. The resulting phone call to the CFO had apparently been explosive. Over the following days, the family implosion continued along predictable lines. Patricia launched a media whisper campaign, suggesting to business reporters that Eleanor was being manipulated in her declining years. This backfired spectacularly when Grandmother gave a razor-sharp interview to the Wall Street Journal, demonstrating both her mental acuity and her firm conviction about the leadership change. Brett's response was equally predictable. He made veiled threats about exposing company secrets, until our legal team reminded him that any such action would violate multiple NDAs he had signed and trigger not only the complete loss of his remaining shares, but potential criminal charges. Heather took a different approach. After her initial emotional outburst, she attempted to position herself as the reasonable family member, the bridge between old and new. She invited me to lunch at an expensive restaurant, where she alternated between reminiscing about how close we were as children, we weren't, and subtly suggesting that she could be a valuable ally in managing Patricia and Brett. "I've always admired your principles, Samantha," she said, toying with her third martini. "And I think we could work so well together. I have all the social connections, you have the business vision. We'd be unstoppable." "I appreciate the offer," I replied carefully. "But any role in the company would need to be based on actual qualifications and contribution, not family connection." Her smile tightened. "Of course. I'm just saying I bring value in ways that might not be obvious on a resume." "Submit a formal proposal," I suggested. "The conditions in your shareholding agreement outline the process." She didn't, of course. What she did do was attempt to access her trust fund, only to discover that those conditions were equally binding. The resulting meltdown apparently required intervention from her latest husband's family. Natalie's reaction was the most surprising. After a week of silence, she requested a formal meeting through proper channels. She arrived at my office precisely on time, dressed professionally rather than extravagantly, with a folder of materials. "I've reviewed the conditions of my shareholding agreement," she began without preamble, "and I'd like to propose a 6-month probationary position in the Community Relations Department, focusing on our nonprofit partnerships." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Why that department?" "Because it's where I can learn the most from you," she admitted with unexpected candor. "I've spent years pretending to know what I was doing, and we both know I was just taking up space. I'd like the chance to actually earn my place here." It was the first genuine interaction I could remember having with any of my cousins. "Probation means starting at entry level," I warned. "No special treatment." She nodded. "I understand. I'll start wherever I need to." Whether her change of heart would prove lasting remained to be seen, but it was a start. As the weeks passed, the company began to stabilize under the new leadership. The initial shockwaves gave way to a cautious optimism as I introduced my vision for Blackwell Legacy Holdings, maintaining profitability while pivoting toward more sustainable, community-integrated development models. Through it all, Grandmother was my constant support and advisor, though she carefully maintained a public position of having stepped back from active management. In private, we continued our discussions over tea, now with the freedom to implement the ideas we explored. "You've handled this transition better than I could have hoped," she told me one evening, about a month after the family meeting. "I knew you had it in you, but seeing it in action, your mother would be so proud." "I still can't believe you planned all this without anyone suspecting," I admitted. "You played a very long game." She smiled, the wisdom of decades in her eyes. "The best legacy isn't built in a day, Samantha. It's built choice by choice, year by year. Remember that as you shape the future of what we've built." And so began my unexpected role as the head of the Blackwell Empire, transforming it day by day into something that honored its past while building toward a more sustainable future. 1 year after that fateful family meeting, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of what was now officially my office, watching the sunset bathe Manhattan in golden light. The Blackwell Building, a 40-story Art Deco masterpiece that had been the company's headquarters since the 1980s, looked the same from the outside, but inside, nearly everything had changed. The transformation of Blackwell Properties into Blackwell Legacy Holdings had been more successful than even I had dared to hope. Our pivot towards sustainable urban development and mixed-income housing had initially raised eyebrows in the traditional real estate community, but the financial results were silencing the critics. Our profits were up 17% year-over-year, with projections suggesting we'd hit the 35% increase I'd predicted within the next 3 years. More importantly, the company's reputation had undergone a remarkable shift. Once known primarily for luxury developments accessible only to the ultra-wealthy, we were now recognized as pioneers in sustainable urban planning that served diverse communities while maintaining profitability. The Chelsea project, my first major initiative, had won 3 architectural awards and was being studied as a model for future developments across the country. Grandmother Eleanor, now 86, had experienced a surprising revival in both health and spirits. Though she no longer maintained daily office hours, she came in 3 times a week to mentor me and to work on the Eleanor and Rebecca Blackwell Foundation, our newest initiative focused on education and housing assistance for underserved communities. The doctors can't explain it, she had told me with a mischievous smile during her last checkup. But I can. Purpose is the best medicine, Samantha. Having someone worthy to pass the torch to has given me a reason to stick around and watch you shine. As for the rest of the family, the aftermath had unfolded much as we expected. Aunt Patricia had made good on her threats to contest the restructuring, hiring 3 separate law firms to find any possible vulnerability in the arrangements. All 3 eventually advised her that the documents were airtight and pursuing litigation would only deplete her remaining resources. She now lived in her Hamptons house year-round, refusing all contact with grandmother or me, and had become something of a bitter presence on certain social media platforms where she occasionally posted veiled criticisms of ungrateful family members and the death of proper business values. Brett's trajectory had been equally predictable. After exhausting his considerably reduced trust fund on legal fees and an ill-advised attempt to launch a competing real estate firm, he had filed for bankruptcy protection 6 months ago. His venture, Montgomery Elite Properties, deliberately excluding the Blackwell name, had secured a few investors based on his family connections, but without the actual skills to back up his grandiose promises, it had collapsed within quarters. He was now reportedly living in Miami, supported by a succession of girlfriends while claiming to be working on a revolutionary cryptocurrency concept. Heather had taken a different approach. After her initial attempt to ally with me failed, she had leveraged her social connections to secure a position with a prominent event planning company that catered to the ultra-wealthy. It suited her skills. She had always excelled at social navigation and provided her the access to high society she craved, even if her own resources were now more limited. She had recently reached out with a carefully worded email suggesting we clear the air, which I interpreted as a tentative peace offering now that she had established her independence. The most surprising development had been Natalie. True to her word, she had started in an entry-level position in our community relations department. The first few months had been rocky. Years of entitlement were hard to overcome, but she had persisted through the challenges with unexpected determination. When her supervisor had first recommended her for promotion, I had insisted on a rigorous review process to ensure there was no favoritism. Natalie had not only passed but excelled, demonstrating a genuine talent for building relationships with community organizations and translating their needs into viable project components. 6 months ago, she had earned a legitimate promotion to Assistant Director of Community Partnerships, and the transformation in her was remarkable. Gone were the designer clothes and superior attitude, replaced by professional competence and what appeared to be genuine satisfaction in meaningful work. We weren't friends. Too much history stood between us for that. But we had developed a cordial professional relationship that occasionally hinted at the possibility of something more familial in the future. The penthouse had undergone its own transformation. While maintaining its architectural integrity, I had worked with sustainable design experts to modernize its systems, reducing its environmental footprint by 60%. Grandmother continued to live there, though now with improved medical support subtly integrated into the design. I had kept my Brooklyn apartment, though I maintained a suite at the penthouse for late work nights and joined grandmother for dinner at least twice a week. Most meaningful to me personally was the conversion of my parents' modest brownstone in Brooklyn. Rather than selling it, I had transformed it into the Wilson Blackwell Community Center, offering after-school programs, art therapy workshops like my mother had run, and adult education classes. The renovation had preserved my parents' home office as a memorial space, with photographs and mementos of their lives serving as inspiration for the community members who now benefited from the programs. Today marked an important milestone, The official launch of the Thomas and Rebecca Wilson Scholarship, which would provide full educational funding for 5 students annually from underserved communities pursuing degrees in urban planning, sustainable development, or education. The first recipients had been selected, and a small ceremony was planned for the community center that evening. As I gathered my things to head to the event, there was a knock at my office door. "Come in," I called, expecting my assistant with last-minute details for the evening's program. Instead, Natalie entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Do you have a minute?" "Just about," I replied, checking my watch. "I need to leave for the scholarship launch soon." "That's actually why I'm here." She handed me a small gift bag. "I wanted to give you this before the ceremony. It didn't seem appropriate to do it publicly." Curious, I opened the bag to find a framed photograph I'd never seen before. It showed my mother and grandmother Eleanor, much younger, standing together in front of the Blackwell building. They were laughing, arms linked, looking remarkably similar despite their different styles. My mother in simple jeans and a sweater, grandmother in one of her trademark suits. "Where did you find this?" I asked, genuinely moved. "In some old files Patricia had stored away," Natalie admitted. "I think she removed a lot of Rebecca's photos over the years. There are more if you want them." I studied my cousin's face, seeing genuine regret there. "Thank you. This means a lot." She nodded awkwardly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year. About family, about what matters."
I was horrible to you, Samantha.
"For years. We all were. And I'm sorry." "Water under the bridge," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "We're building something new now." "Are we?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. "Building something new as a family, I mean not just as colleagues?" I considered this as I carefully placed the photograph in my bag to take to the event. "I think we might be. It takes time to rebuild trust, but I'm open to the possibility." Her smile was tentative but genuine. "That's more than I deserve, but I'll take it. Would it be all right if I came to the ceremony tonight? Not as a Blackwell or company representative, just as family?" "I'd like that," I said honestly. "Mom would have too." As we left the office together, I thought about the journey of the past year. The Blackwell legacy had been redefined, not just in business terms but in human ones. Wealth wasn't just about money or property or power. It was about purpose, values, and the impact we chose to have on the world around us. That evening, standing in what had once been my parents' living room, now transformed into a bright community space filled with scholarship recipients and their families, I felt their presence strongly. Grandmother sat in the front row, proudly watching as I introduced the program. Natalie stood quietly at the back, her presence a small but significant bridge to a possible reconciliation. Even some of the executives who had initially been skeptical of my vision were there, now enthusiastic supporters of our new direction. As I concluded my remarks, I glanced at the photograph Natalie had given me, now displayed alongside others of my parents. My mother always said that true wealth isn't what you have, it's who you become. The Blackwell legacy isn't about buildings or balance sheets. It's about the lives we touch and the communities we help build. That's the legacy these scholarships will continue. Looking out at the diverse faces of the scholarship recipients, young people with dreams and determination who would go on to shape cities and communities, I knew we were building something that would outlast any real estate empire. Something my parents would have been proud of. Something worthy. They called me poor once, but now I know that wealth isn't measured by bank accounts or property deeds. Real wealth is measured by purpose, by integrity, by the positive impact you make in the world. Have you ever had a moment when you realized your true worth went far beyond what others could see? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Like this video if you believe that karma eventually comes for those who deserve it, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family, justice, and rebuilding after betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. The greatest victory isn't winning against others, but becoming the person you were meant to be all along.